Thank you very much, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest session in the Raisina Dialogue. I'm Robin Niblett, Director of Chatham House. My very great pleasure to have this opportunity to interview or have a conversation with Hamid Karzai, as you all know, President of Afghanistan between 2001 and 2014. 2 elections won and a democratic handover to your successor. These are things maybe we now assume are normal and take for granted, but I think a very important element of your legacy for Afghanistan. And as everyone here will appreciate, remains a very important and influential figure within Afghanistan and its politics. We've got a limited amount of time, so I want to jump straight in, if I may. We discussed briefly yesterday with your National Security Advisor, Mubi, yesterday, the issue of the election. Election held back on September 28th. Preliminary results announced on December 22nd, giving the incumbent, President Ashraf Ghani, a bit over 50% of the vote, 50.6% or so. So it means he avoids a runoff, but we've now entered, or have entered still, this period of confirming the election results. 1 million of the 2.7 million votes removed for irregularities, purged from the roll. It's leaving really a little under, at least by my very rough calculations, under 20% of the registered voters having then had a chance to give their vote. And even that number is a very small proportion of the 37 million Afghans today. How credible, how powerful, how capable then can a government be with what strikes me as a limited democratic mandate, given how many people's vote was able to be brought in? Are you worried that, you know, the position of President Ghani will be at all affected by this protracted period between the results and what's the ultimate amount of people who voted?
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, Afghanistan, unfortunately, after the initial successes that we had in the early 20s, is going through a very difficult period because of conflict, because of the arrival of more extremist groups on our soil and their operation, and because of the continuation of massive casualties for the Afghan people and a territory that's not all controlled by the government. So it was expected that the elections would be difficult, that it would be extremely hard for the election institutions, the managers of the election, to attract people to come and vote. All of those factors were known. And it is within this environment that the country conducted elections. My personal view has been now for some time that we needed to have focused entirely on the peace process. So that with peace in Afghanistan, then there would have been a greater chance of enfranchisement for the Afghan people to come and participate. So there would have been no denial to the majority of the Afghans to come and vote. Is the circumstances of the country, the conflict in the country, the major power plays in Afghanistan and the regional arrangements, the complexity of the whole situation that makes our elections what they are.
Yeah. And therefore, that is the context. The government, once confirmed, should be able to set aside this period and be able to then act cogently and coherently thereafter.
Well, whatever emerges from this troubled period and from the troubled elections will depend a great deal on whether the government that emerges from these elections will be able to attract a broader audience of Afghans into cooperation with the government.
Do you think it will need to be some type of coalition, even though it's not the kind of 50-50 thing that result that took place last time? Would it be a wise thing to be doing?
I'm not advocating coalitions. I'm advocating a broader mandate, a broader outreach,
right,
whatever form that may take, for one purpose only, for the sole purpose of the country moving faster to negotiating with our fellow Afghans, the Taliban. I don't see any other way for Afghanistan but the success of the peace process.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, no country on earth would see a better day with conflict unless they have peace, and that's what we should be seeking.
So that brings us a little bit actually to the US role, and before I come to the peace process specifically, I wanted just to draw in the role of the United States, which obviously has placed such an outsized importance in the current situation in Afghanistan and in its future. You were notably critical of the US role, probably from the mid-2000s onwards, but increasingly as your presidency went on. Mm-hmm. You made some pretty strong statements about the amount of money that was being poured in. I think in the end it's been about 133 billion over a 10-year plus period, certainly since 2001, over 7.5 billion a year. That amount of money, in a way, was not helping, that the approach to security was not necessarily helping. There's just been, I think many of the people here will know, initially leaked and now I think released set of papers from the Inspector General for Afghanistan Restructuring in the US, which ended up actually confirming some of your worries. Mm-hmm. To what extent can Afghanistan succeed so long as the United States is as actively involved? Where do you want to see the US? Do you see it as a long-term partner? The sooner they're out, the better? Where, what are the choices?
Well, I'm very clear on that. The reason I refused to sign the bilateral security agreement with the United States was because they could not make a promise of peace for us. They wanted the BSA, the bilateral security agreement, but they also wanted to continue fighting in Afghanistan, continue in a situation of conflict in Afghanistan and for the Afghan people. That wasn't acceptable. Mm-hmm. My condition was clear. Bring us peace, bring us security, let's have a better managed relationship with Pakistan and our neighbors, and then you're welcome to stay in Afghanistan. Now, too, now that the US has started the peace process, which is a very, very good thing, which we strongly support and have given the support to Ambassador Khalilzad to carry on. The overwhelming majority of the Afghan people would agree to the US presence in Afghanistan, provided Afghanistan becomes peaceful and the Afghan people are given the opportunity to live in a dignified way in their own country, meaning that there is no interference in our affairs, that they don't set the election results for us, that they don't do things that would hurt our sovereignty or sentiments. With that condition, the pillar of which is, of course, peace, then the US may be given the right to stay, but that decision has to be made by the Afghan people through the proper institutions that represent the Afghan people.
That does bring us then, I think, to the negotiations, because these have been ongoing, as you know, very actively through 2019, 10 rounds, some ups and downs, visits to Camp David, then the peace process is dead. Now it started again back in December. You went out to Moscow a couple of times. I think you helped arrange this intra-Afghan dialogue. But in the end, the negotiations right now, as I understand it from the US side, are partly about will US forces stay or not? The Taliban position is pretty clear on that. If there's going to be an agreement, no foreign forces remain. So you may welcome their continuation under the right circumstances, but this is going to be a very difficult negotiation if that's where we end up. What would your red lines be in these negotiations that they hit this really critical phase right now? Is it about the human rights element, women's rights, education? Is it more about US troop presence? Where do you think the landing point might be for these very difficult negotiations?
It's a myriad of issues. It's a lot of issues. Well, I don't know, should I be looking at you or should I be looking there?
I think you should be looking at them.
Over there?
Don't look at me.
Right. It's better now. Well, I'll look both ways.
When you've been going too long, I'll be looking at you.
Yes. It's a number of issues. Between us and our fellow Afghans, the Taliban, is the issue of us, the Afghan people, regaining the control of our destinies. And that cannot happen unless we have peace. Once we have that, then it is for us, Afghans, including the Taliban, to determine the parameters that would determine our way forward. Is it a new constitution? Is it an amended constitution, a modified constitution? Is it going to be governments created by elections or by other means? These are issues that we can discuss. But there are also fundamentals on which right now I can talk as a citizen of Afghanistan to you that I will not compromise. That's the right of our girls to educate. That's the right of our girls to go and work. That's the right of the society to grow. That's the right of the Afghan youth to rise like the rest of the world, the youth is doing. But together again, us and the Taliban, we must also sit down and agree on how far are we going to engage with the United States. Will we allow the United States to stay in Afghanistan? And under which circumstances, under which conditions? Will peace be definitely something that we will be seeking from the United States? Of course, yes, we are seeking that. So there are two principal sides to this. As far as the peace process is concerned, there's Afghans and the Taliban, and Afghans together and the US, and then on conditions for us internally, and on conditions for us with the United States and the rest of the world.
You know, there's been quite a bit of concern that right at this incredibly sensitive moment of the negotiations, the role of Iran and the United States might end up interfering in the process of negotiation and the search for peace. Obviously, the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani was a pretty dramatic moment. You were outspoken in your views on it. I think if you don't mind, I'll quote your tweet. This action brazenly violates all international norms and threatens to further destabilize the region, and you obviously offered your condolences to Soleimani's family. Now, would you still subscribe to the view that this was potentially the beginning of a moment of deep instability? We had Foreign Minister Zarif here yesterday. I certainly, like everyone else here, heard his references to the need maybe for an arms control track underneath the a kind of OSCE for the Middle East. He was definitely, I heard at least, in putting out, alongside all of the traditional complaints about the United States and the reasons even for the shooting down of the airliner, the tragic events that took place there. I was trying to hear, there was a bit of outreach. And I'm wondering whether you deeply worried that this moment is now created more instability and spillover to Afghanistan? Or do you think with hindsight now it looks like maybe the drama and the de-escalation that's following it could lead this to be a more productive environment, therefore Iran doesn't become a problem in Afghanistan?
Very, very good question. I was in Tehran after the assassination of General Soleimani on a pre-arranged visit. Two very grave developments took place there. The assassination of General Soleimani and the coming of the people of Iran to the streets in protest, and millions of people, showing the unity of the Iranian people and the pride that they have for their country. And then the extremely unfortunate downing of the Ukrainian plane, which made everybody sad, including the Iranian people. These two very grave developments definitely are going to impact how the Iranians see themselves and their future. What I saw there in Tehran was, while there was anger, extreme anger at what the US had done, I also felt that there was a lot of wisdom shown in not overtly aggravating the situation beyond repair. I saw the same thing in the US in their remarks and their statements. I saw President Trump's statement after the Iranians retaliated, and he was a lot more reconciliatory than we had heard it before. So I do see an opportunity, and I hope there is an opportunity. As a neighbor, Iran is one of our greatest neighbors. We share language, culture, religion, and a lot more, history. We have had very good relations with the Iranians despite US presence in Afghanistan, and the Americans have also been all right as far as this relationship is concerned. So we very much hope as Afghans, as neighbors of Iran, and as a country with strong relationship with the United States, full of course, positive and negative elements, we very much want wisdom to prevail on both sides. But I personally believe that this wisdom must first start with the US.
Yeah. Well,
and I'm sure the Iranians will reflect the same way.
Okay. I mean, obviously, covering a lot of territory here, but we've got a limited amount of time. Moving to your other key neighbor, or another key neighbor, Pakistan.
Yes.
Since you've spoken here last, I mean, a lot of changes taking place in the country. In Imran Khan, a different style, maybe a different approach as well. You've always argued very strongly that there would be no possibility for peace in the long term in Afghanistan without everyone understanding the future of Pakistan itself internally, but also obviously its engagement in Afghanistan, its support for elements of the Taliban and so on. How do you see that relationship emerging or changing at the moment? What's different about it today? What could the Afghan government be doing? What are you expecting from the Pakistani government?
We have two sentiments towards Pakistan. Sentiment one, when we became refugees in Pakistan after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the Pakistani people received us with tremendously open arms. We lived there for, decades, some of us, as if we were living in our own country. And we are very grateful for that. On the other hand, we have serious complaints against the Pakistani government and their military institutions for the interference in Afghanistan, for the promotion to extremism, and all of that. We have also on our side in Afghanistan perhaps made some mistakes in the management of this relationship. While I tried my best to have the best of relations with them, I knew there were difficulties in both countries. With this background, Pakistan and Iran are the most important and most consequential neighbors of Afghanistan. The two countries that can impact us deeply, with the US presence in Afghanistan or without it.
Yeah.
They have an immense impact. Pakistan has the greatest impact. So peace in Afghanistan is indeed very much dependent on how we evolve our relations with Pakistan. We want the best of relationships with them. We have the issue of the Durand Line with them. Mm-hmm. But the issue of the Durand Line has not been ever used by Afghanistan to cause wars or conflicts or other forms of instability between us and Pakistan. This has been something that the British did, and Pakistan is on the legacy side of it. In spite of all these differences, the fact is that Afghanistan can neither be peaceful nor prosperous without the best of relations with Pakistan. But you think, and Pakistan likewise.
But are things different? Have things changed? Are they changing? What's your reading of the relationship that exists now between the president and the armed forces?
Relationships are not good right now. Relationships are not good right now, unfortunately, but they must improve, and we cannot have peace in Afghanistan unless we find ways in Pakistan. Let's be very, very realistic. Yeah. India is the greatest friend of Afghanistan. India has been a tremendous contributor to Afghanistan. But the impact that Pakistan can make in Afghanistan is a lot greater than any other country. And for us to have peace, we need to have the best of relations with Pakistan. We need to promote this relationship. No, I don't know how, but we need to.
And to what extent then will the Pakistan relationship with Afghanistan be influenced by the state of Indian-Pakistan relations? I mean, is this it's always been a bit of a knock-on effect.
It's been not a bit of a knock-on effect, but a
big,
huge effect. This unfortunate state of relations between India and Pakistan has impacted us tremendously. We did try to balance this, but the balancing was very, very difficult. We will put it this way. We want to be the best friends with India. And Afghans have proven to be the best friends with India. But we will tell Pakistan that our friendship with India is not going to stop us from being the best brothers and friends with Pakistan.
Okay.
How to convey this is a heavy, difficult task, but we must continue and we must manage that.
Let me take you to a couple of other items. We've got about 9 minutes left. The rise of ISIS. When National Security Advisor Hamdullah Mohib was speaking here yesterday, he noted that there'd really been some big successes on the Afghan side, in particular in the Eastern Territories, against ISIS. To what extent do you fear there's an evolution as the peace process with the Taliban perhaps progresses into 2020? There's almost an alternative insurgency terrorist movement emerging with Afghanistan. Is this an implant that will not take root, or is this an implant that is taking root that will play out of the same social frustrations as well and economic frustrations that have come in the past? What's your sense of ISIS?
One of the issues that seriously affects our thinking, our attitude towards the United States is the fact that they came in the name of peace and stability for Afghanistan and the region and the fight against extremism. That initially we all succeeded because the whole world was together with it. Today, we neither have security nor the defeat of extremism, but rather, unfortunately, it was under the US military intelligence presence in Afghanistan, and in spite of their military and intelligence operations that the ISIS and Daesh emerged in Afghanistan. So we see it as a consequence of US presence in Afghanistan, and we want the US to address it, together with the rest of the region. Just last month, in a conversation with Ambassador Khalilzad and their military people, they told us, the Americans, that the month of November had 3,700 Afghans killed and wounded, only in 1 month. So when you have that many of your people dying or getting wounded in a month, no matter how much territory you take or lose, you're not out of trouble. You're in deeper trouble. So the question shouldn't be for us, have the Afghan government taken territory, or have we done this or that? The question here is how to bring to an end the massive casualties to the Afghan people in life and property, and to bring us to a normal life of peace and stability like the rest of the world. That should be our focus, not winning by killing. No, that's not our focus. That shouldn't be.
But the ability to complete a negotiation of this sort also relies on being able to have a balance of forces that's successful. You mentioned the large number of deaths, in particular in 2019, of Afghan civilians, but the Afghan security forces have been taking a huge casualty toll.
They're also
as well.
Afghans.
And they're Afghans as well. I mean, but if the security forces are weak, the Taliban may decide that they can negotiate and keep it going, and at some point they may win. Do you fear, A, that the Taliban could win and decide the negotiation, keep it going, keep the war going, the security forces get weaker? What's your sense?
When you're in some form or the other of a major conflict in the past 40 years of your history, the question of winning becomes not secondary, but one that does not apply, at least not to my mind. As an Afghan, I don't want to take a village from a Taliban by killing him and fellow villagers as well. I want to sit down with him and I want to resolve our issues. Is the issue foreign presence in Afghanistan, the Americans? Do we have all other issues? It's not In other words, it isn't our war. It isn't our conflict. It's somebody else's war. Why should we be dying in it? Why should the Taliban be used in this conflict against their own country? Why should we be used in this conflict against our own country and against our own people? So you're getting my point?
Yeah.
This isn't our war.
But it is your country, and it is, you said, is Afghans fighting Afghans. But,
it is not fighting Afghans fighting Afghans. It's Afghans being put against another Afghans. And that's what we should end. We should retake the hold of our own destinies.
And is ISIS an implant, or is ISIS a manifestation of just another deeper ongoing set of frustration amongst Afghans?
Very visible implant. Very clear implant. They fell from the sky.
Well, they came out of places where they were.
And we know who controls the skies.
Can't quite see. In any case, never mind. That image
I can tell you.
Okay. I just want to pull back in the end on one particular point. I mentioned the Washington Post, obviously, release of those papers. They were critical as well of your government. Some of those comments there. Corruption had flourished during your tenure as president. Institutions have to be strong. If institutions aren't strong, in a way, groups like the Taliban have the space to come in. Citizens don't feel they're getting what they need. They go for security rather than freedom. It's almost a human instinct, even if that security is brutal. What do you think in terms of your legacy? Could you have left something different? Are you worried that the legacy was perhaps a form of peace, but the institutions weren't strong enough? Or are you proud that you left institutions that were strong, but the peace wasn't strong enough?
I left institutions behind. When I took over, Afghanistan had none at all. No administration, no institution, no laws, no constitution, no roads, no this, no that. We keep counting. And we built it. And we built it with the help of the rest of the world. We built it with the help of the United States, that I have a lot of complaints against. We did it with the help of Britain. We did it with the help of India, with the help of Japan, with the help of our neighbors. So in what we have achieved, we are grateful to the rest of the world. Where we have suffered, we have told the rest of the world, don't do it this way. That causes us suffering, and that's our complaint. Therefore, Afghanistan has institutions. Where I was critical of the United States began with civilian casualties, began with the violation of our homes, barging into our homes, blowing up gates, killing people, killing children, killing women. These were the issues that no honorable individual or nation will tolerate or accept. Will the Americans accept the Afghan forces going into their homes in New Hampshire or in New Jersey and arresting people and killing people? No, they will shoot us for that. Will you agree it in Britain? Will the Indians agree to that? Will you agree the mother of all bombs being dropped on you? Tell me, anyone, will you agree that in your countries? Will you allow the mother of all bombs to be dropped somewhere in a desert in a part of the world? They did it. So we had to say no. On corruption, petty corruption. Day-to-day corruption in the delivery of services was our issue, sure. Yeah. The issue of the Afghan government and people, sure. But huge money, huge contracts and subcontracts and hundreds of millions of dollars is an American issue. It's not our issue. They did it.
It created,
and the Washington Post is right.
It created, well, the Inspector General, which is more, I suppose, to the point as well.
Yes.
You have an office of the president. It is quite a presence, as I understand it, in Kabul. You're here, you're present, you're in Tehran, you're in Moscow. What is the role of former President Karzai looking ahead? What do you see as your contribution, therefore?
Former President Karzai is Citizen Karzai. And that's my role.
With a nice retinue, I hear as well.
Yes, Citizen Karzai. Citizen Karzai. Citizen Karzai, like all other Afghan citizens, wants to have his children go to school in Afghanistan, get raised in Afghanistan, get educated in Afghanistan, have good schools in Afghanistan, and when they are very good, send them to better schools somewhere in the world to get educated, to have life in our own country in dignity and pride.
Mr. President, I think there's no doubt your commitment to your country, and I also want to thank you for taking a lot of questions, taking them very succinctly, and therefore giving, I think, this Raisina Dialogue a very good feel into the situation in Afghanistan. Please thank President Karzai for his visit here.